Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Power Word Talk. It's me, Tal Aviezer, the only one that ever saw beyond the harsh, cruel facade that you present to the world to the sensitive person you are underneath. And I am joined today by Matt Gordon. Matt, this is where you say hello.
Do I have to?
Andy Canistra.
Hello, Matt. Wait, I'm not supposed to say hello, Matt?
Shut up, Andy.
0 for 2, and Luke McCormick.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
and
Luke.
I see we are
Hi,
just
Luke.
joined by Rachel Savicki.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, welcome. We are just getting started. Chaos Party Dungeon Master Rachel Savicki joining us for the second time. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. The main topic of today's show, which is Dungeons and Dragons and Children. Thank you all for joining me to talk about this. Let us dive right in. I will throw out a question. How is running a table for kids different than running for adults? Rachel.
Yeah, so the big thing, first of all, it's going to vary significantly depending on the age of the kids. So when we say kids, we could be talking anywhere from like 6 or 7 year olds to like 14, 15-year-olds. After that, pretty much, they may need a little more guidance, but they're pretty much playing on the same level as everybody else. So on the younger end of that, really, especially the big thing in my mind is that you have to be willing to roll with what the kids want to do and to very much go in with a yes and attitude. Because honestly, like we talked about, most of our players not reading the rules enough to, min-max a system necessarily. The kids definitely won't. Like what you're doing with kids is mostly going to be, guided imagination. And then sometimes you roll some dice because it resolves uncertainty. It makes for some excitement and, it makes it fun for them.
Right.
So very much you have to be willing to change plans on the fly more than you would with another group. You have to be willing to go with what they consider fun and to adjust that if you get there and you find out that they are, not feeling it tonight or that they are looking for something different than what you planned. And you very much have to be kind of in tune with your group a little bit more than you would have to be with adults, because with kids, they won't necessarily have the ability to like verbally communicate to you that like they super want to do something in particular or that they're looking for a certain type of game. So you really have to be willing to try things and then change plans when it doesn't work.
Got it. What would you say, assuming that we're talking about children under 12? So I feel like 12 is the age where you kind of, some 12-year-olds could more or less play D&D.
Right.
Some can play something pretty close to just a regular game of D&D. But I think that most kids younger than 12 can't quite yet. So for kids younger than 12, what do you think as far as session length? Like how long should you realistically be trying to play a session with them?
Sure. So, definitely on the older end of that, you can lean towards a little bit of a longer session. I would generally say that you're probably looking for an hour and a half, 2 hours. If you're leaning towards 2 hours, you probably want a break. And with that in mind, I'm saying, an hour and a half, 2 hours, but that includes the time that like you're sitting down and saying, hi, how was everybody's week? What's new? And then some wrap up at the end where you say, all right, so this is what we did today. And these are the exciting things we have planned for next time. And, good luck with that thing you have going on in real life. Because part of it is at that age, it really just is a social activity.
Right.
So it's really important to engage the kids as kids who are just there to, play some games and have fun.
Luke, what has your experience been like running for kids?
Yeah, so the only kids I've really run for are my own. My son Miles, who is 8, and my daughter Edith, who was sort of 5 at the time, the last time we played. And yeah, I think the thing that strikes me most is that they've experienced so much less media than the typical sort of adult player, and so things that we know as tropes or other sort of like signals of danger don't really resonate with them the same way that they would for when I run the game for my friends. Like they can see sort of through the sneaky merchant, and it's so much fun that they don't know those things and make decisions without that context. And I think that's a fun place to play in. And then it's also the only place where I allow myself to go in totally cold and improvise as we play, which is not something I would do for my friends because I don't trust myself enough. But it was a cool experiment to be able to do that and just sort of come up with something on the fly, and a great way to sort of improve as a DM too.
It's funny that listen to you say that because I sound like such a prick saying this. I've played Hamlet a few times, all right, and I know, I know, I can hear myself. I'm boring myself talking about it, but you do have this sense of, man, some of these people, this is their first Hamlet. Like I can fuck up Hamlet for someone if I do this wrong, right? This is like they're gonna think this is what Hamlet is, like whatever I do today. Do you feel any of that sense of pressure? Like, oh shit, I'm their first orc. Like I am going to form their impression of like what a dragon is.
I don't think so. I think that, first of all, kids are extremely impressionable. Mm-hmm. So if you make a goblin or an orc that happens to be a goofy, whatever it is, it's not like they're going to suddenly watch Lord of the Rings and go, that's not an orc.
Hey,
he lied. He's a bad DM. I don't like him. No,
right.
I think that's contradictory to kids. Kids' imaginations are so vibrant and malleable that the onus is not on you as a dungeon master to set a precedent with any of these kids that will somehow or other be, detrimental to their future role playing. I don't think.
I will actually jump in there, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I definitely feel like there is a little bit of pressure on the level of like, I don't want to like sour their entire view of the hobby if they don't like the game that I'm running in particular. If they're not having fun today, I don't want them to hate tabletop games forever.
That is fair. That's a fair assessment, Rachel, honestly, because I think we do that for adults, let alone kids. I mean, adults who have never played the game. And you're like, well, here's Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm your dungeon master, and this is what the game is about. And then you're like, oh, God, did they like the game? I really hope they like the... Are they going to come back for another session? Is it what they expected? Anxiety, right?
Yeah.
So kids are much more forgiving, I think, than adults are, actually.
How can or should D&D be modified for younger kids? I think Rachel touched on this a little bit, some of the things that she does. But anything else like that anyone that you can think of, like, I definitely had to change how this works.
One thing I do, I've only really run for kids like 8 to 12, and they're actually really good players. But generally I hate to say it, but I railroad them. I give them a very clear, simple mission because they're so creative. They'll come up with the funny, crazy stuff as you go. And as a dungeon master, you have to expect you don't know what they're going to do. They're going to come out with things that you're like, wow, I would have never thought that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious and fun. And that's where the fun for the kids come in. You just got to go with it. You guys were talking about that already. You just got to go with that flow and just whatever crazy thing they're coming up with, just, roll it, go for it. But I definitely railroad them in the beginning and then let it fly. But I've thrown things at kids. Like I had one adventure where they met this robot who was kind of broken and he was super nice. And then they met a goblin who was kind of mean, and these two were enemies. And the kids figured out pretty quick that the goblin was the good guy and the robot was the bad guy. Like they're so smart. And I was so like, man, I can't believe they already figured it out because they're already talking about it behind the NPC's back. Like they actually were doing a really, really good job. My biggest problem is though that every time I start a game with kids, the first thing they want to do is find pets. I don't know if anybody else has had this problem.
Oh my gosh.
Actually,
so
yes.
true.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to find a pet.
Amazing.
Yep.
So my last adventure I did, I put them in a corrupted land where there were no little animals, there were no nice plants, and they had to figure out, what corrupted the land.
Mhm.
And so they could fix it, and then at the end they could go find their pets, which we obviously didn't do. But and the kids were like, they were so into it because they're like, something messed up our world and we're gonna fix it. And bam, they went off. It was great.
Nice. When we play with adults, I think a lot of us who are DMing, there are sort of different ways we approach, like maybe a session 0 or like a discussion of lines and veils or hard and soft content limits, or just some general way of saying this subject matter is or isn't cool in this game. And it's usually stuff like we're not going to do homophobia in this campaign. We're not going to do sexual violence. We're just not going to do bullying. Like, is there a way? Is there any kind of session 0 setting expectations thing that you would do of that nature with children?
Absolutely.
And how does that work?
You're the adult.
It's not even that. Ask the kids if they have a way to describe to you the kind of game that they, first of all, what if they've never played Dungeons and Dragons before, what they think Dungeons and Dragons is a game about.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from there you can get an idea from those kids as to the kind of game that they want it to be. Even if they don't know exactly what it's about, they may say, it's a game where you run around killing monsters. And if they say it with a certain amount of exuberance, then I think that you pretty much know what it is that these kids want to have within
Right.
their game.
And a kid may say that exact piece of information, but with a negative spin on it.
Exactly.
Like, I hate it because it's a game about running around killing monsters.
Exactly. And so you can tell from a kid, because they have no subterfuge to most, with most kids anyway, at least within, I would say probably the 8 to 12 year age range.
Well, let's check that. Luke, would you say that your children are manipulative bastards?
If they're like Luke, come on.
Yeah.
Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But in all honesty, I think if you ask a child what it is that they want from the game, then you can tailor that session or that campaign or whatever it is to hopefully what it is that the child expects to get from it. And I think that when it comes to content that or behavior within any kind of game, that comes in part and parcel of learning the game, even from an adult's perspective. I think that when you know at the start this is a game without this particular kind of content as an adult, you would know to stay away from it. But sometimes, even with that, I can start to sense a player's tendency, and I can start to determine how best to talk to that player about it. With kids, it's easy. You just go, we're not going to talk about that. And they go, okay. It's as simple as that. Kids are much more understanding of the kind of behaviors, maybe from school. Or just too far out of school. Yeah.
They're used to it.
Anybody else on this one? Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
We play a system called No Thank You Evil.
Love it. Love
that. Oh, cool. Yeah. So Monty Cook Games, and it's right there on the tin. And in the rule books, like at any point, any player can just say No Thank You Evil, and you go. The characters go have a popcorn break or hang out or do whatever they want. And it sort of pauses whatever conflict is happening, and it's kind of, I love that it's just sort of baked in as that sort of escape button if things get too intense. But yeah, that's in terms of like D&D and how I think about that, it doesn't necessarily have that built in. DMs need to sort of provide that for the players, and I think when I think about the adventures that I want to run for kids, and Tal, I was asking you for advice on this. I was like, things that aren't too combat heavy.
Right.
So I don't want them to think that D&D is just about sort of solving problems with violence. Like my cousin and brother and friends. But that it can be so much more. So yeah, it's fun to. I think I do a lot of the sort of engineering of the content and those limits ahead of time, so we don't get into sort of an uncomfortable place.
I just wanted to mention that when Luke asked me that, one adventure that I recommended to him was an adventure called The Little Astronaut, which some of you may know. It's by Anthony Joyce, who actually published this one on Dungeon Masters Guild. But it's called The Little Astronaut. It's on DM's Guild. It's a children's bedtime adventure and can be run for children as young as 3 years old. And it can be run in like 10 to 15 minutes, or with more focused children can be run for up to an hour. And you kind of take them, you're exploring the astral station and you're encountering like creatures that live there. But it's an interesting approach because it sort of asks you to have the kids tell you what they see and hear as they go exploring. So they're kind of partially making up the story, and then they're interacting with all of the strange creatures that they meet and being creative. It's really fun. It's different. It sort of is a D&D, and it's somebody bending the system a little bit, which was not necessarily designed for kids that young. So I just thought it was a cool take on it. Anybody else on the sort of managing expectations for kids?
I will just throw in there that, like, even after you have the initial, conversation with them, it is, in my experience, something very much that has to be something that you're willing to come back to throughout the course of the game as needed, because they generally know like what they're having fun with, but they may get into a scenario where one player is having a lot of fun and maybe somebody else isn't, and maybe those, what they want to do is not compatible.
Happens with adults too.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But with adults, a lot of times we can look at each other and say, okay, my buddy super wants to go fight the dragon, so like this time we'll go fight the dragon. Whereas with kids, they tend to need a little bit more guidance in order to reach those kinds of compromises. And so it's a little more, it requires a little more proactivity as a dungeon master to kind of like bring them into those conversations and say, well, okay, so it sounds like you want to do this and you want to do this. How can we bring this together so that everybody has fun with it, and, try and find some happy medium for them. And in my experience, kids are great at like, oh, well, I understand that my friend isn't having fun with this, so like I want everybody to be happy, and like we're going to find a happy medium. But they need a little bit more guidance to realize that conversation needs to take place.
Which also shows like what a great sort of social learning tool the game can be, right? They're
absolutely
learning cooperation and listening, and empathy to a degree. I mean, I think D&D is a great engine of empathy. It's one of the things I really love about the game. It gives you a format for empathy, which is pretty amazing. How young is too young? Sorry, did I cut you off? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to mention just on that topic. I think it's a very powerful social learning tool. I've read like a post a while back of a DM dad who sort of used D&D as like a tool to, teach. I think like they stole from somebody. The kids decided to steal from somebody, and then there were sort of consequences for doing that, and using sort of this D&D adventure as sort of as a vehicle for sort of like these like life lessons, which I don't know. I mean, I think that's fine, but I think there might be other ways and other opportunities to broach that. I don't know. I've never used D&D as sort of like a vehicle for.
I feel like kids would sense it as soon as it got heavy-handed, right?
Right.
Like it would then become kind of a drag.
Yeah. So,
I mean, I think there's probably a way you could do that, skillfully, but like, I think you should not lose sight of it as a game and a fun story.
Yeah, once that becomes the objective, I think the bottom falls out. Yeah.
I think it's easy to be straightforward with kids too.
I
had one kid who was deciding to tell all the other kids what to do on their turns, and I said, "You can decide what you do on your turn, but you can't decide what they do. They get to decide." And he went, "Okay," and he just stopped doing it. I was shocked. I was like, "Oh,
that's awesome!" Yeah,
but it worked really well. But also I'm the adult in the room, so I'm also in charge, and they all respected that. So, and it was fine. We never had a problem again. So.
How young is too young?
It depends on the game. Luke talked about this this really wonderful game, No Thank You Evil. There's other ones like Hero Kids, which I actually started my kid on before he got into D&D. I think maybe the tail of the question is, how young is too young for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition?
Yeah, I think I'm sorry to not be more specific. Like what is the age? I mean, the game is advertised for 12 and up. Yeah. Do we feel that's accurate?
I think so, absolutely, yeah. I mean, to play a scaled down version of 5th edition where you don't have to work through the math and perhaps not bog down other players or timing on the amount of playing that you want to do, I think something, on the order of maybe, if you have really smart 8 or 9 year old who can just, rattle through the math and has been, sort of brought into the hobby by a friend or a parent or what have you, they might do well in a game with 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. Yeah. But probably, you don't want to give them leeway to have that go into like an adult game, because there's topics and subject matter that might not necessarily be
sure, but just in terms of the basic mechanical complexity and ability to latch on to the feedback loop between players and DMs and sort of understand the basic process of the game.
By themselves,
8-year-olds can play.
Yeah, I'd say by themselves probably no younger than 8 for certain kinds of games, just because otherwise it feels like it feels really tough to have them understand the mechanics and have them remember it perhaps for next time.
On this topic, are there classes that you recommend for, those starter players? Like my kids want to play casters, and but like I don't think they would want to sort of keep up with all of the reading and nuances. They'd be disappointed if
there's a way to get around that, Luke, because every kid that I've played with in my kids' games, they love wizards. Right? Yeah. They love playing casters. They want to do this. So they see Harry Potter and they're amazed, and they want to be Harry Potter. That's great. So you flavor the magic in the game and just give them like easy words to remember. Okay, these are the kinds of spells. Like take out the really complicated spells. Mm-hmm. Give them spells that you think that they may latch on to. And then you're basically paring down the spell list a little bit. That's smart. Then roll the math for them and tell them what happens. If for certain instances, anyway.
What I would also add to that is, I think that the 2 starter sets are really good at providing it is 5th edition, but a basic and simplified and scaled down. Because 5th edition is now pretty mature in its life cycle, and I wouldn't throw fucking 18 books at a kid that have now been published for all the player options that are available for them. But those starter sets, the original one, The Lost Mine of Phandelver, comes with pre-gens, but it does have a 60-page rule book that'll take all the pre-gens up through 5th level. And the Essentials kit, the later one, actually has rules for character creation, but it's limited in scope. There are fewer options than the player's handbook, right? It's humans, elves, dwarves, and halflings, and it's fighters, clerics, wizards, and rogues. And I think the Essentials kit also has bards, and also the spell
gauntlet mode,
right? And the spell lists are shorter, right? Like I think for wizards, there's probably 8 or 9 first level spells, 6 second level spells, and maybe 3 or 4 third level spells in there. So I think it's more manageable for a 12-year-old who really wants to play a caster to not have to understand the 30 or 40 spells per level that are now available to like a wizard.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, as a 12-year-old, there are 12-year-olds who absolutely will geek out over it, dive in, and be ready to, play with a full spell system
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say, at 12, I was playing
Hamlet,
first edition. I was playing Hamlet. I was playing first edition. Using those. If you look at those first edition books now, that shit is not user friendly.
No. Oh no, it's super complicated.
Wall of text.
And just like the presentation and the formatting have come a long way.
Yeah.
But I was able to wade through those Gary Gygax, confrontational.
I'm so sorry.
I think best read aloud in the voice of comic book guy. Imprecations towards how you should treat your players and stuff like that. But I could play first edition D&D at 12 years old, certainly. And I think that 5th is easier, just because it's laid out in a more reasonable way and more readable way. Apropos of that, did you play yourself as a kid? What age did you start?
Oh gosh, I guess it depends what you determine as playing, like by the rules. Because if I played by the rules, I guess I started like 10, but I didn't really understand them. My grandmother gave me a book because she didn't know what it was, but she thought I liked the art because I went to Forbidden Planet, and I was like, I like this book, Grandma, and so she bought it for me, and then she's like, well, what does it come with? It comes with a 20-sided dice. Okay, fine, here you go. It's a 20-sided. I have no idea how this game works. And I read it, and I still didn't understand how it worked, and I had no one to play it with, so I kind of just remembered half the rules and told my friends about it, and they remembered half the rules, and then we sort of created a game group, and we messed it up real bad. But I guess first edition, so I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9.
Yeah, I think that's the funny aspect of D&D for those of us that did start playing as kids in the 80s. There wasn't the internet. There's a good chance that you kind of just had to figure it out. You may not have had another group to observe. If you're lucky, somebody's older cousin somewhere, could teach you. But I think a lot of groups just sort of gave it a shot. And I think that you could look at 2 groups of kids playing, and it would seem like a completely different game. Based on how they were interpreting these weird books.
I played.
Well, I thought it was like the cartoon. I thought it was like the 80s cartoon.
Was amazing.
Mm-hmm. I hated that cartoon.
I loved it and hated it at the same time. Like the one guy just had a shield, and I'm like, how come he doesn't have a sword? But then the other guy had a big
because he was a dick. Yeah. That's why.
I think I could sense as a child, because I think I'd probably already seen sort of Star Wars and Indiana Jones, and I'd probably kind of read The Hobbit, and I think the cartoon seemed sanitized to me. I can imagine that 8-year-old Tal having a reaction why does he fucking stab him? Why?
I think the cartoon is a lot of fun to love to hate.
Yeah.
There you go.
Anybody else, your own sort of childhood experiences with D&D?
I mean, I didn't play D&D, but I grew up on the JRPGs that were, descendant from it. We didn't have that kid who got the books and wanted to run the game. If I would have been in that circle had it existed. He or she existed. But yeah, I didn't. The first time I sort of rolled a dice at the table, I was 35 years old. So,
got it.
Wow,
not a day too soon.
See, here I was about to say I didn't play as a kid because I didn't start until I was 15 or 16. But yeah, the only reason that I actually got to play at that age was because we had a local game shop open up in our little teeny tiny town that the game shop owner obviously knew that we were a bunch of kids who had $0 and were not really going to actually spend money at their shop. Mm-hmm. But he was very on board with running games for us in the after school hours before most people were off work. So we could go there right after school, play for, 2 hours, and then bounce before really the evening rush hit the shop. So it worked out really well.
What age were you at that time, Rachel?
So I was 15 or 16, but I was there mostly with my younger brother and his friends who were probably 10 or 11-year-olds at the time. Yeah.
I started playing when I was about, 11, 12, but I played with older kids, and they had all the books, and they made me be the cleric. And I swore I would never play a cleric again.
How's that working out?
Whoops. This podcast thing. But the rules were so thin. We didn't know what we were doing, but we had a great time. So that's where I started. I guess it was first edition, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think when I started, the thing that I enjoyed most was honestly not even playing the game per se, but doing the initial character building and then like I think it was AD&D that we were starting with, and then doing the like gear selection and basically like taking your starting gold and doing your in-character shopping.
Yeah.
I thought that was super cool to just kind of like figure out what gear your character was rolling out with, and what random items from that collection of things that were not weapons or armor and just, was random inventory stuff that you were going to happen to have in your pocket.
Yeah, the promise held by some of those items in the, like, I better buy some wolfsbane.
Right. Like, do I need a mirror or
Yeah,
not?
yeah.
Am I going to regret not buying this right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny story about that, actually.
Yeah.
I came to a kid's game, and everybody had said that they were going to make their own character using D&D Beyond, and that their parents would help them out. And we got to the first session of the game, and I checked out their characters because they all joined the D&D Beyond campaign that I had set up for them, and I looked at the characters, and I'm like, okay, looks good. All right, move on to the next one. Okay, that looks good. Move on to the third one. The inventory of this particular character had, let's see, +3 plate mail. The
Good choice.
a Vorpal sword. Like he just went down the list of all of the things in purple in D&D Beyond and was just like, yep, I'll take one of those. I'll grab one of those. Oh yeah, I'll take that and that one too. Oh yeah, this is the shield that turns all people to stone. I'll grab that too, just in case.
I will tell you, not for nothing, I ran a pro game for an adult group 2 weeks ago, and an adult in that group did exactly the same thing.
Nice.
Characters completely, and not only that,
Probably made his kid do it.
but they also had every feat.
Yep.
They've
Nice.
gone through. Yes, I also would like to be a dungeon delver. Why not? If it's an option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll even take it.
Actually, my daughter is a little young for to play the game, but there are touch points like that. If we're waiting around, we'll make a character together on my phone, and she'll sort of help make the decisions about what this character might be proficient in, and that's really fun. Additionally, like Hero Forge. Like creating a sort of visual model with my kids of a character that they're thinking of really, I think, gets them sort of immersed and thinking creatively about sort of who this person is, and it's just kind of a fun tool to play with too.
I started at age 10. It was definitely 5th grade. One kid owned I believe what is now called the Menser box, the red box, which was Dungeons & Dragons, not Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which was a separate product at that time. This was basic Dungeons & Dragons. We passed it around among a group of 4 or 5 kids, and my first experience playing, which is included in the sort of player's book of that red box set, which is a really cool idea, there was a solo adventure. And everyone in the group played through the solo adventure first, and it walked you through the mechanics of the game. It told you, like, okay, you've now come into this cave, now you should roll this. If the goblin hits you, you should subtract hit points, and then sort of in a way that added complexity with each encounter. By the time you got to the end of this sort of 20 or 25 minute experience of playing a solo adventure with the book, you felt like you had a really solid understanding of the mechanics of the game. And I honestly think that is an underutilized tool. There are some really good solo adventures for 5e also on DM's Guild. My friend Paul Bimler has written some really good ones. BC Beats, Death Knight Squire, I know is one that he wrote. But I think that's a great way for kids if you can get a tool like that, especially for it's a leisurely experience to learn it that way. But I thought that was one thing that old Menser 1985 box set did really well that I'm surprised hasn't been repeated since. It was just a solo adventure you could play with the book. It was sort of like halfway between a choose your own adventure and D&D, because there was some dice rolling and some character building involved as well. Final question, does anybody have any, I talked a little bit about the Little Astronaut, and Luke mentioned No Thank You Evil, and Matt mentioned Hero Kids. Any other adventures or systems that you would recommend for children?
So the one that I've mentioned before is Humblewood. which is a 5e system. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a 5e system where the players are small animals, and there's a main campaign where they're trying to save the forest from fires, and then there's, at this point, actually 3 short one-shot adventures that they've put out for the system as well. It's very much something that I find has a lot of appeal for younger players because they do get to be fun animal characters. And it's something that is very much streamlined so that it can be played very simply. But at the same time, it has enough depth built into the story and the system so that it's still, a lot of fun for adult players too. So especially if you have a group of parents who want to play a game with their kids, that's actually a really good option too.
Seems like a good time to mention that you can play some Humblewood 5th edition D&D with DM Rachel through Cast Party. We've got some offerings up on the website right now at cast-party.com. A couple of Humblewood one-shots, the Wakeworm's Fury and the Heart of Daco. Hopefully I'm pronouncing Daco correctly. No offense to Daco. And those are each 2 to 3 hour games for 4 players, ages 10 and up. And Rachel would be more than happy to run either of them for you.
Absolutely.
As we mentioned, it's an animal inhabited world, Humblewood. And if you're a fan of Redwall or Secrets of Nim or Frog and Toad, you will love it. The Wakeworm's Fury takes place in a seaside port, and that is imperiled, experiencing some trouble. Signs point to the nearby Tideswell Cave as the source. You and your fellow adventurers are going to investigate, and the Heart of Daco, you will venture into the Tangle Wilds, a vast jungle far south of the Humblewood region, to prevent an age-old threat from destroying the jungle. So those are both really cool one-shots. We also have a kids campaign with DM Patrick Marin that you can sign up for called the Young Wizards Council, which is set in a magical academy in the land of Oma, where young magic users are sorted into wizard schools chosen just for them. Sounds a little bit familiar. And it's a 6 to 8 week campaign with spells and secret chambers and magical pets, speaking of Andy's kids that love magical pets, and angry plants and friendship and much more. So you can check out both those Humblewood one-shots or Patrick Marin's Young Wizards Council kids campaign at cast-party.com.
Can I jump in and plug my other one real
Absolutely.
quick?
Yeah.
All right. So the other system that I really recommend for kids is the PIP system by Third Eye Games. It's a generic role-playing system. It's a D6 system. It's very much meant to be a first tabletop role-playing game. So it's very story-focused. It has material out for a bunch of different genres at this point. They keep putting out supplements that have an adventure and pre-gen characters and some supporting material for various different genres. So there's really something for pretty much every kid to get engaged with through that system if you want. And because it is a very streamlined system, it's very easy for kids to get into, have a lot of fun with, tell a great story, and roll some dice along the way. So that is another one that I run.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. We have given the people 75 minutes, more than they deserve. But is there anything else that we've overlooked on this issue that anyone else would, we can squeeze it in here? Speak now.
On that last topic,
yeah,
I would like to add in the sidekick rules. I think they're in Tasha's because I used them for a one shot for kids, and they all got to play wolves, and I gave some of them a couple extra spells and things. And because they're simple, the kids just took right to them, played no problem, so they worked really well too.
Awesome, and also included in the Essentials Kit box set, by the way. Those cool. sidekick rules. I think that's where they were first introduced, but the ones in Tasha's, I think, are a little broadened a little bit. Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining me. This has been great. I really appreciate you all taking the time to do this. Thanks to everyone for listening. And have a good night, everybody. Matt, this is where you say goodbye to the people.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, Matt.
Goodbye, Andy. And everyone.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night. Really appreciate you joining.
Good night, everyone.
Good night,
of course.
Absolutely. See ya.